So you just got your car or you're just getting into cars and you're wondering what is the first modification you need to do with your car? Should you do full bolt-ons and make the car as fast as possible? Well, kind of, but not really. There's ways to make your car faster without necessarily dumping a lot of, let's call them horsepower modifications onto your car. Your car can become quicker with other modifications. And just as a quick disclaimer here, the reason why I'm making today's video that I should have or would have had liked to label why I never recommend power modifications first, I'm actually dedicating this video to a friend of mine who recently passed. He got into a accident, not necessarily related to this, but I just kind of wanted to do a topic related more towards like safety. And when we get into the modifications of the cars, or at least the recommended modifications that I would suggest, as far as the first modifications you should do for your car, you're going to see that a lot of these modifications will actually enhance or improve the safety of your car while in their own way making them quicker. But we will go over what is considered full bolt-on because this is what most people are interested in when they first get their cars, not just BMWs. And when it comes to full bolt-ons, this is basically anything that is a direct replacement of something else in terms of the air coming in and the air going out. So starting us off with the red outlines here, these are air ducts that feed in behind the grille because that's where the air comes in for BMWs, and then it goes up through the air filtering system. They don't all exactly look like this, but the airflow is generally the same. And then the air will go down into the turbo inlet, to the turbo, down into the boost pipe, through the intercooler, from the intercooler up to the charge pipe, into the engine where it combusts with the fuel, and then out through the downpipe and the rest of the tailpipe or exhaust. And in there you have mid pipes, you have mufflers, you have resonators, all of that stuff pretty much that we just covered, with the exception to maybe the turbo because it is a little bit more intensive in terms of a DIY. All of that is considered a full bolt-on when you replaced all those parts. We're talking not just this stuff that brings in the air into the engine, but we're also talking about the downpipe all the way through the muffler. And when you do this, it's usually accompanied with a tune at some point in time, because it's not until you pair these two things together, the full bolt-on as well as the tune, that you really get the full benefit of it. You don't really get the full benefit of telling or having the extra air from the scoops and the high flow filter, as well as not just a performance, but also peace of mind and preventive maintenance with a metal charge pipe versus a metal one. You don't get the full benefits of the extra air if you don't tune the car to tell it that it has extra air. So it should add fuel. Otherwise, you're going to run lean. And then after that, you have to tell the car that you either do or you do not have a catalytic converter, whether it be high flow cats or a complete bypass of the catalytic converter. Just make sure to follow all the rules and regulations based off of where you're at. And from there, it will go through the mid pipe, and that's essentially what's being represented by these two pipes that are going to essentially back into one, which would in this case qualify as the resonator. And basically, I would say is if you're looking for the best sound, do the downpipe first because you will have some performance benefits out of that. Then if you still want more, try doing the resonator before the exhaust, because that's going to save you some money. And sometimes that's good enough. Like if you're saying the downpipe, with the downpipe, it's almost there. It sounds almost perfect. If you're saying that, do the resonator. And then if you still want more, do the muffler. Unless you're saying, I wish it was a lot more aggressive, I want it to be a whole lot more aggressive, then you do the muffler first And then if you want a little more, do the resonator. That's the way that I would approach which one you should do first. Because the muffler does control a lot more of the sound, while the resonator is mostly drone and some sound. But that's the way that it goes. Most of the modern day exhausts, even stock ones, basically after the catalytic converter, there's not that much more performance gains in a base model car, even like an M235i, unless you're running something like a dual exit exhaust system where you have two pipes in the entirety, not just in this cross section like this, but in their entirety. So I'm talking you have at least 2 catalytic converters that are getting their exhaust gases from 2 separate sources, not splitting them up as we have here. It's not until you have a system like that where it does really make sense to, say, introduce like an X pipe in there. Other than that, it's just sound for the most part. Sound, and maybe you get a little bit of weight reduction, but not so much nowadays because most manufacturers are using stainless steel. It's not until you get to titanium that you start to see some weight reduction, but titanium is very expensive. However, I would still not recommend doing any of this stuff first unless it qualifies as preventive maintenance, like the charge pipe, the boost pipe, or the intercooler. Everything else that comes with full bolt-on, you can do as they go bad or as it's time to replace them with routine maintenance. Like you could use a high flow filter when it's time to replace your stock filter. You could replace the turbo inlet pipe if you start to notice there's some cracking there. You can, you don't necessarily need to do the boost pipe, but if you want a little bit more performance, a little bit more consistency with the air, you can go ahead and do it. If you plan to do the charge pipe, the boost pipe, then you could do the intercooler as well because it's easier when you have all that space, but I still wouldn't recommend it unless those parts are bad. Now, the next thing that people will immediately go for is wheels. Also something I wouldn't recommend, not because wheels aren't important, because obviously they are. If the wheels aren't supporting the tires, if they're not perfectly, they don't necessarily have to be perfectly, but if they're not holding the tire into place, they're going to leak out air. If they're dented or bent, they're going to mess up your car's performance. It's going to put extra stress on suspension components. So by all means, if your wheels are bent or damaged in any other way, that's going to prevent you from driving well or put stress on other components, by all means, get new wheels. However, most people get new wheels because it's aesthetically pleasing. There is some performance benefits of it when it comes to weight reduction, but most people are looking to get new wheels because they look nice. Again, if your wheels and tires are functionally perfectly fine, I would say skip the wheels, save your money. But if your tires need to be addressed, by all means, get new tires. Don't wait. If your wheels are in good enough condition that they don't shake the car when you're driving, that they can hold the tire together so that it holds air, what I would say is inspect your tires and get new tires if you need them. Get tires that are going to be suitable for whatever condition that you're driving in. If you want, I personally use the Michelin all-season 4s because they perform so well. I would say they perform like 80 to 90% as well as the 4Ss. But when it comes to really cold climates or even a little bit of snow, that's where they outperform the 4Ss. They're also much cheaper. You get a little bit more tire tread with them, so they last longer. So you get a tire that's performing almost as well as the 4Ss in sunny, dry conditions, but outperforms it in the much colder and wet conditions, as well as a little bit of snow, but for much cheaper, and they last longer. So that's what I would recommend if you're looking to upgrade your tires. Get something that's going to give you a lot of bang for your buck if you're looking to upgrade multiple things. Which brings us to brakes. A lot of times people will spend a lot of money on their tires, or sorry, their rims, because they look good. They'll get new wheels because they look good. It's nice to look at, but your brakes, you don't really see them other than the rotors for the most part. However, good brakes, good tires are critical for the car's performance. If you want it to handle well, to stop when you want it to stop, these are the things that you need to address first before adding on all of that power, all of the bolt-on modifications. Because if you have all that power, what good is it if you can't stop on a dime when you need it to, when you can't hang a turn when you need it to? These modifications that we're starting to get into, tires and brakes, are going to improve the car's performance. It's going to help you go faster by not having to rely on too much of brake or too much of tire. It's a good balance between the two. You can hang that turn if you need to. You can stop when you need to, and then you can accelerate when you need to. So in a weird way, good tires and good brakes are going to help you go faster overall, not necessarily in straight line speed, but they will make you go faster by helping you stop and maneuver the car how you want it to. But it's also going to prevent unwanted stress on your other suspension components, like the bushings on your control arms. And this is just a diagram of the 4S's on the bottom, I believe, as well as the all-season 4s. They do have a slightly different pattern. They're both asymmetrical, so they can be rotated at all four corners if you have a square setup. And this is what I like about having a square setup. Of course, the cars, a lot of performance cars don't come with them, so you would have to get aftermarket wheels in which you can rotate them. And if you're getting wheels, not just for the aesthetics, but to extend the longevity of your tires, then it might be worth it to get wheels in that case, if you plan to keep the car for a while. Of course, you have to work out the math for yourself, but if you're able to swing a set of wheels that are lighter, that will allow you to rotate your wheels at all four corners, and you already need new tires, and some places will give you discounts on wheels on a wheel and tire package, then it might be worth it, because now you've just doubled the longevity of your tires versus having to get them at the halfway interval on a staggered setup. So that's why I recommend, if you're not tracking the car, if you can sacrifice looks just a little bit, then I highly recommend a square setup, because you get better longevity. It serves you better in the long run. And now when it comes to true performance mods, now that we got some of the boring stuff out of the way, I always lean on suspension first before full bolt-on. Now, if your suspension is fine, then by all means you can go full bolt-on. But if you're thinking about going full bolt-on and you hear a creak, or if the suspension gives a little bit too much at a speed bump or at a dip, then you should address the suspension first, because this is very much just like the tires and brakes. They will help you go faster without adding direct power to the car, because it's going to help you maneuver the car how you want it to. It's going to help you on the takeoff, because if you have a high performance suspension piece like struts and springs, coilovers, KWs, Bilsteins, whatever suspension brand that you want to go with, that spring is going to compress just a little bit less, and your car's already going to be a little bit lowered. So there's not going to be as much give when you accelerate. That's going to help you go faster. Same thing when you're going through the turns, you're going to be able to maneuver them better. So it's going to help you go faster in that respect. Personally, I went through two sets of suspension, if you will. One was the regular KW DDC, because the M235i is equipped with the EDC system. I wanted to go with something that was direct plug and play, and I didn't have to delete anything or adjust anything. It's the first suspension setup that I really had to deal with, a nice one at least. And so I wanted something that was a little bit more user-friendly. That's why I went with them. But I found out that the spring was a lot softer. So you can see here we have the KW spring on the left and the Swift spring on the right in blue. And the Swift spring, although it is shorter, The spring rate of the helper springs are about the same, but the Swift spring is much stiffer. That's why it's okay if it's shorter. In the video that I did with the M235i, where I compared them and did the Swift spring install, there's a lot more give on those KW springs. So by having a stiffer spring that has more space in between the coils, it allows the spring to compress more, but because it is a stiffer spring, it's not going to compress as much. It's just if you need to, like if you take a nasty bump, it's nice to have the space so that you won't coil bind. The car can accelerate faster because there's not as much give in the spring. The car doesn't have to squat down and load up before it goes. It's pretty much just ready whenever. This is also good for clearance on speed bumps and driveways as well, which is my primary reason to upgrade it. Once I got the new wheels and tires on there, it was very hard for me to clear speed bumps and driveways. I would always scrape my lip. And so I needed stiffer springs, and that's when I reached out to Swift and I said, hey, what can you do for me? Here's my situation. Here's the current setup that I have, and this is what I would like to achieve. So if you don't find the answer that you're looking for on forums or on any YouTube channels, feel free to reach out to Swift directly and ask them, hey, could you help me out with my setup? Here's what I have, here's what I'm looking to achieve, and this is the issue that I'm experiencing right now. They're more than happy to help you out. And this should go without saying. Before you do any power modifications, make sure to do the maintenance. So we're talking belts, tensioners, pulleys. This stuff needs to be addressed because when you add more power, you're adding more stress onto these components. So if these components are due for a replacement, make sure to do them first. These are wear items that go bad periodically. We're talking, when it comes to maintenance related items, anywhere from like $5,000 for an oil change. These parts can be replaced every $30,000, $40,000 depending on how hard you're running your car. Coolant can be replaced every 70,000 miles. So just make sure what components are critical to supporting the extra power in terms of driving the pulleys in this case. Cooling the car down with coolant, making sure the car is lubricated with oil, making sure that all those components have been properly addressed, replaced, and are within their service intervals is critical before you start adding any power to the car. Same thing here. If you want to add performance or at least leeway for when you do the horsepower modifications, you're going to want to add some components that help you cool the car. And so that would be like clearing up anything where you have a leak, like an oil filter housing or oil cooler gasket. But when you do these jobs, because you have the thermostat off anyways, or the cooler off in this case, go ahead and replace it with an upgraded one so that it can dissipate the heat better. If we're talking like you're going to do a coolant change or it's time to replace the thermostat and the water pump, you could upgrade the radiator as well, because when you take out the radiator, it gives you more room to work on the thermostat and the water pump. If you need to at that time, inspect the hoses, make sure that there's no cracks or there's nothing fishy when it comes to their look and their orientation. If you need to replace them for new ones, put in the thermostat, the water pump, your upgraded radiator, because it can dissipate the heat better. And then once all that has been addressed, then you add the power. Recently, one of the last modifications that I did was with the valve cover gasket. I was having a leak there. Again, don't skip on the maintenance. You know, if you feel that you can, take it on yourself. Some jobs that require a little bit more time, space, and meticulousness, like the valve cover, if you feel like you need to, there's nothing to be ashamed of by taking it to a mechanic. Just make sure to price compare. Shop around a little bit, make sure that you're getting a fair price, that you're getting it done by a reputable shop, and that their work is going to be warranted. If they're okay with it, ask them, is it okay if you source the part yourself from a place like FCP Euro, which is going to give you a lifetime warranty? That way, when you pair it with their service warranty, no matter what, you're covered. If the part fails, send it back to FCP Euro and get another one with store credit, I believe is what they give you. If it goes bad because of the service, then they're going to have to take care of it on their end, right? But I would always recommend, if you have the tools, if you have the time, if you have the confidence, try to do it yourself. But if not, there's nothing wrong and there's nothing to be ashamed of by taking it to a shop. Sometimes we just don't have time. We don't have the space. We don't have the tools. If you're looking to get tools to do a job like an oil change and then you grow, that's fine, because those tools are going to be used on several other jobs. But if you're getting tools for the first time and you're trying to save money by doing the valve cover gasket yourself, you're not going to save money because you have to put in the initial investment when it comes to tools, lighting, containers, as far as, like all the little bolts and everything to make sure that everything is in order. You have to spend a lot of money on the tool investment before you see an actual return. So if you're starting with something simple like going full bolt-on, if you will, or doing an oil change or doing a belt and pulley job, and then you slowly add to your arsenal as needed, then by the time that you get to something like a valve cover, maybe you really only need the specialty tools or the tools that make it easier. In the case of the oil filter housing gasket, it's very useful to have I think it's useful to have the Gear Wrench XP 8mm spline drive wrench, the double box end one, because you do have the fine tooth maneuverability with the 120 positions, but you also have that fixed end that makes it so easy to get off that bottom E-Torx bolt. And then it becomes more and more advantageous to do the things yourselves. Tools are an investment. If you don't plan to work on your car consistently, they won't save you money in the long run or in the short run. In the short run, it costs a lot of money because you have to get them if you're starting from ground zero. But it is worth it and very satisfying if you end up doing these things yourselves. I hope I've done a pretty good job of putting some content out there in which that encourages people to get out there and try it themselves. And if not, send me a DM, list a question in the comments. You don't have to just use my videos. There are a lot of other great BMW YouTubers out there who are an excellent resource and are happy to answer your questions. And the last thing that I would recommend before going full bolt-on, is anything that's going to improve your safety. So we all know that BMW has those terrible halogen headlights, and it wasn't until recently where a lot more manufacturers started coming out with either LED versions or plug and play HID versions where they look like the OEM, but it's just a little bit different, essentially giving you more visibility on the roadway at night. If you can't see where you're driving, it doesn't matter how much horsepower you have. It's really reckless to drive with a lot of horsepower if you can't see where you're going. So if you can do something like increase your visibility when it comes to your headlights, making sure that your taillight bulbs are all working, that your seats are functioning as they should, especially if you plan to track your car, right? Making sure that you have good supportive seats that are within spec, that pass all the guidelines that they need to. Making sure that your airbags are fine, your windows are working. All of those things contribute to your safety. And as I said before, the topic that we have here today is really brought on because of the passing of my friend. And I just want people to be as safe as possible. I want people to, of course, enjoy the car. Going fast is part of the enjoyment, but I would love to encourage as many of you as possible to be as safe as you can, maintain your car as well as possible. That way, when you add power, there's as little risk as possible as the car failing on you. It would be terrible if the car overheated, if the belt snapped, if your oil was bad and the engine seized up, if there was a gasket leak and you had coolant and oil mixing, if there was a leak and you didn't have enough oil in the system, if you couldn't see where you were going. I hope none of that stuff happens to any of you. And so that's why I personally never recommend full bolt-ons or any power modifications with the exception to preventive maintenance like the charge pipe and the turbo inlet pipe first. I always would recommend, safety, make sure that you can see headlights, do your maintenance, do suspension, tires, wheels if you need them, and brakes. Those in themselves will make you faster. And then if you want, go full bolt-on. So with that, we'll open it up for our Q&A section. Daniel William, greetings from Chile. How's it going, man? Well, welcome in. Oh. Wonder what happened there. I guess my settings got reset. And thank you for tuning in from Chile. Jonathan, hey Fritz, how's it going? Good, good. How's it going with you, Jonathan? Hope everything is going well. Charles, what were the specs for your springs? Ooh, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I can pull up where I do have the specs. And I will share them here in the comments. Hope that helps you, Charles. I think I even have it in the description if you just want a shortcut for it. M248, yeah, they should work for the same because it's the same chassis essentially. The weight may be a little bit different with the engine, but we're threading the needle really thin there. Sabor, is that how I say your name? Hey Fritz, what do you think about the BMW 440i 2018? The B58 is a fantastic engine. When it comes to first mods with this car, if everything is working fine, I would say address the cooling components first. So I'm talking coolant hoses, coolant lines, return lines, oil cooler lines, all of that stuff that's plastic, replace them. If the rubber, make sure that the rubber is in good condition, and don't be surprised if you need to swap them out. Make sure that the connections are good. If the connections are plastic, see if there's an aftermarket vendor giving out metal ones, and go from there. Once you shore up those cooling components with the B58 engine, it is a very solid car. More so than the N55. It's just those cooling components, and then everything else is typical BMW. Replace the charge pipe, turbo inlet pipe, do the Mickey Mouse flange, stuff like that. Relax, people. Hi from Puerto Rico. Welcome, welcome. Happy to have you here. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Tommy Z. Hey, how's it going, Tommy? Hope you're doing well. Jonathan, good thing I did all my maintenance up until now except the oil pan gasket. Ooh, that one's a tough one just because you have to drop the subframe. But I mean, if you've done everything up to this point, I mean, if you're up for a challenge, take it on, man. I mean, why not? But if you're going to, I would say consider upgrading to the S55 oil pan. See if you can get a used one, because most of the components there, it's passive, right? Or it just, there's nothing electrical about it. It's just all mechanical, passive flow by the oil. So there's not that much risk in buying a used one unless you can see in the images that it's visibly bent, dented, or there's a hole in it. Otherwise, it's a pretty safe thing to get used. If you get it from eBay, they have the return policy or the buyer, something like that, very similar to Amazon, where if the description of the item doesn't match what you actually get, you can send it back and you get your money. So that's why I like buying from places like eBay and Amazon, because you do have that buyer guarantee. If you're buying parts brand new, then by all means FCP Euro, because it's backed by their warranty. N55 wheel, best drop-in air filter for the N55. I'm going to bring you to this one right here. Let's see here. This is the exact one that I use. But I no longer pair it with those scoops. I pair it with the scoops from Velocitech now. Just because the scoops are bigger, they're right in front of the grill, so they draw in more air. And you can check those out here. I hope that helps. Yeah, I prefer a drop-in filter versus an aftermarket one because the OEM one is already good at sealing off the engine air, so the hotter air, if you will, and it's just bringing in air from behind the grill, so nothing but cold air here. Everything else, it's pulling in air from the engine. I don't care how much of a heat shield they give you, there's still usually a little bit of a crack. And then any of the other ones that are out there, they're basically mimicking the OEM system. So I just like to keep it simple, drop-in filter, save some money, put the money into somewhere else for other modifications, and get the same amount of performance as well, because basically the only thing that really changes is the high flow filter. Tommy Z, I got a 2016 BMW M235i xDrive. What's your suggestions for it becoming a reliable stage 1 street car? Well, stage 1 essentially is basically upgrading all the airflow components and then stopping before the downpipe, if I'm not mistaken, and then getting a tune. So when people say stage 1, stage 2, they're usually referring to how many bolt-ons you have. So stage 1 is basically you do intake, turbo inlet, boost pipe, intercooler, charge pipe, and then that's it. And then you do a tune, and there you go. That's stage 1. xDrive cars are pretty good because you do have equal distribution of the power to all 4 wheels, but I would still say suspension. Suspension is going to help out that car tremendously because you do have equal power at all wheels. For that small of a car, it's the same exact car that I have, albeit yours is 1 year newer or younger. Suspension on these cars is going to be the best thing that you can do for it. So wheels, tires, suspension, that's what I would suggest. Going faster is cool. It's nice. But you can do without less power, right? When you're in a car, say if you get into 2 identical cars, right? One is, has full bolt-ons and is tuned, and the other one is stock. You feel a loss in power, yeah, but you can make up for it, right? You can change how you drive a little bit. You can be a little bit harder on the gas, and it's almost the same experience. Almost. You can't say that once you've done full suspension on a car. You put on coilovers, you put on sway bars, you do the end links, you do a strut tower brace, you put in the stiffer springs in my case, you do some weight reduction modifications. Yes, you can also change how you drive so that the car will turn well and all those things, but there's only so much you can do. When you take a wide left turn, and a stock car, no matter what you do, unless you go very slow, will have body roll. You will have to stay in the turn longer with stock suspension versus aftermarket suspension. And you feel it, like you feel the car squat under acceleration, like you can't change that. And so there's more of a dramatic difference by driving a car that is well tuned in the power modifications and not. There is a difference, but it's not as great as driving a finely tuned suspension car, a finely tuned handling car, and one that is stock. Trust me. It might sound crazy. It might sound boring because you don't make all the sound. Nobody but you notices, other than some people notice that it looks a little bit better because it's a little bit lowered. But when it all comes down to it, who is the car most important to? You. Who should experience the best experience of the car? You. So who cares what it sounds like? Who cares what it looks like? By all means, wash your car, but who cares if it sounds cool, if it goes fast? I want everyone here to be safe, to have a car that when you take a turn, you're not concerned that, oh my goodness, am I going to make the turn? I want you to like hang the turn, take it, you know, like 50% concentration, if you will, maybe because you're listening to the radio, or maybe you have kids in the back, you're talking to your parent on the side, and you just know, like, even if somebody jumps out and cuts you off, you're going to have more than enough time to maneuver. The car's not going to swing. The car's not going to fishtail, and you're going to handle that turn flawlessly no matter what happens to you. You can't say that with power modifications, but with suspension, there's just that peace of mind knowing that I can maneuver out of this. It doesn't matter what really happens to a certain extent. As long as I'm safe, I have a lot of room to counteract what happens to me on the road. So that's what I would suggest. Wheels, tire, suspension, then power, then go for your stage one. Charles, do you know if there are any companies who are working on making metal versions of the plastic attachment for the coolant lines? The coolant lines. No, I don't. Like, rubber and silicone is fine though too for coolant. So if you find that's a pretty solid replacement. The only one that is like kind of quasi metal, like metal lines, but they're not really metal, are like AN lines, but those are mostly for oil. Yeah, if you find like silicone or rubber, that's fine too. Like for example, if they made a rubber line for that hard plastic that runs to the return reservoir of the N55, that would be great. I'd be perfectly fine with that. The hard plastic, I don't know why they did it like that. I don't know why they didn't cover it up if they planted to use it. It's a terrible design, and they knew it, right? And BMW knew it, and yet they went to go with the B58 and make more lines like that, right? That are more under stress. Doesn't make sense. You could look up Vargas Tuning. I know that they do a lot of hose work, if you will. We can look them up. Oh, Vargas Turbo. So let's see here. So like, see here, they have silicone charge pipes. I know they have it for the N54, I believe. An entire hose kit. So I believe this is aluminum. Let's see here, BMW N54. Let's see here. Let's just go N54 products. I'm pretty sure it's the N54 that they have the entire right here. So if you get like a aluminum billet adapter, like that piece, and then the hose itself is silicone, then you're fine. So if you can find something like that, I don't know if we have it for the N55. let's see, what do they list this as? I don't think they have a kit like that for the N55 just yet. See, they have the 90-degree coolant tank fitting, but not the actual hose for some reason. They have universal hoses that you have to cut yourself, but that's about it. I've kind of been checking in on this from time to time, so it's been a while, but if they have it here, that would be news to me, and I would love to. Nope, they don't. That's it. But yeah, I would say Turner is also into fabricating their own stuff. ECS, same thing. So just keep an eye out for them. But off the top of my head, I do not know. Sorry. Jonathan, someone told me that because the joints of my upper radiator hose are brown, they are prone to failure soon. Is that true? Have you heard of this before? It can be. It's basically kind of an indication of corrosion or wear. If you've ever done the Mickey Mouse flange and it breaks off, or if you look inside, you'll see that it's really brown. Now, if you plan on reusing it, don't do this. But like even if you took something like Scotch-Brite or even like a knife or a screwdriver and you kind of scrape that brown part, you can feel that it's a little bit softer. It's easier to take off the material just a little bit, at the very least, depending on how worn it is. And then it's very brittle. Typically, if you pull it out and it breaks, you'll see that that inside portion is that it looks dark brown when it's wet, but it's a very light brown once it's dry. It typically breaks wherever the brown portion is, and then like whatever is the kind of like regular or good plastic, the black portion is usually fine and is what is still in one piece. So it can be. Charles, I asked because I had to replace the thermostat connector and the oil filter housing. Oil filter housing is already metal. Those lines, they're only rubber. Once you get past the bend around the engine or down to the cooler itself, you can replace those for AN lines that will be adaptable to either the OEM system. You just have to get an adapter for it, or I believe they're direct to the Mosselman oil thermostat. The oil filter housing. Oh, the oil filter housing connector. Yeah, that one's plastic as well. What I would do is if nobody makes it by the time that you're really ready to get it, just get it from FCP Euro. That way, if it fails, you have the lifetime warranty with them, and then you're good to go. Yeah, it's not as permanent and it's not as good as, like billet aluminum, but the next best thing that we can hope for is a part that's under warranty for the lifetime that we have the car, basically. Love coffee. Thank you for making those awesome maintenance instructional videos. The best I've ever found. Happy that you are local here in the Bay Area. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I don't know if I would say I'm the best, but I'm aspiring to be. I would say that there are other people out there, like Keys Motorsports is really good. Justin Boyce is really good. And I do my best to kind of like model myself after them, if you will, because they've been in the game much longer than me. So I kind of take certain bits and pieces of what I've learned from them and combine it from things that people have taught me. Like if you guys haven't check out Obsessed Studios page. In terms of filming and cinematography, he's taught me so much. And then when it comes to being partnered with the shop that I'm partnered with, SV Bimmer, they've taught me a lot at the shop in terms of like, hey, this thing, a lot of new people, like new mechanics will miss. Hey, this thing right here, we've noticed that a lot of people try to fix their car, and this is the part that they bring it to us at because they get hung up here. And it's by putting all of that information together that I think the videos come out as well as they do. And I owe it all to them, right? I'm no mechanic by, trade. I just kind of learn things from other people. And this is why I would never say that my videos are the best or I'm the best. I'm I'm just learning. I'm always learning, and I'm just sharing with all of you the little bit of information I've gathered, and hopefully I've presented it in a way that's easy to follow and easily digestible, if you will. But thank you. I appreciate that very much, and I guess that means that I'm doing a decent enough job so far. But don't worry, I'll do my best to get better. I always try to get better every single time. There's a small mishap that I have. I'll save it for another video that I had with one of my cars, and I took it to the shop, and I noticed. I did notice this is. When I took it to the shop, the guys were like, "Oh, it's a small thing. You messed up." Of course they give me a hard time because I make videos on YouTube or anything. They give me a hard time, sure, but it's in jest. There have been other customers, let's say, that act like they know it all, and they're like, "Oh, I don't need this," or I only need this because I don't have the time. And then come to find out, like the thing that they did prior, let's say it's an oil filter housing gasket job or whatever. They'll say, "Oh, your gasket's leaking. Would you like us to repair it?" And they'll say, No, I replaced it. It's perfect. It's fine. But the thing is leaking. And they're like, "How long ago did you replace it?" Like, "Oh, last week." And then, they're a lot more harsher with them in a way, at least, behind closed doors. And so I think when you're able to humble yourself in a way that you're open to criticism, you're willing to learn, and you're willing to apply the things that you learn, people are also more receptive to teaching you new things. And for me, it just makes everything better, at least in my case. And I'll do my best to pass it on as well. Jonathan, if I do get the S55 oil pan, do I need to get the S55 oil pump and the other part that other people suggest to do? I know we talked about this before a couple months ago. You don't need to. If you find one that's within your budget, you can, but you don't need to. The pan in itself with the baffle is direct plug and play. There's no coating or anything required. Like the N55 in itself will not run dry of oil. The pump will not run dry of oil unless you track your car heavily. It's under like the N55, it's got to be like almost at a very specific or at the threshold angle at higher G's. That's when it will starve the oil. I just say to do it because the pan is already out, and if you can find another one, for relatively cheap, and then you sell yours, it's a worthwhile upgrade for minimal cost. If you don't plan to track your car, you don't have to. You'll probably never run into the issue. I'm talking like, even if you're canyon carving, there's only so much canyon carving that you can do. And it hardly ever happens. Most of the people complain about that N55 starvation. It's almost always on the track, and they're usually tracking it very hard. But yeah, if you don't fit those two criteria, the pan is all that you need from my research. If you find something different, please let me know so that I can make that correction. But from all the research that I've done, and prior to this, unless you're tracking it very hard, the pan is all that you really need. Eric, hello, I have an N20. I've done everything to it and it works great. But do you know if there's anything I could do with the ticking noise of the injectors? That's just how they are. There is a way that you can tune them to be a little bit quieter, but BMW was aware of this. They had a service bulletin out that said, hey, this is just how it is. There's nothing that you can really do. We can kind of like tune it so that it doesn't make as much noise, but it's still going to make noise. I had the same question to the guys at the shop, and they said that's what they told me. One of them used to work at BMW dealership before. That's why I know about the service bulletin. Alex, I want to know if rod bearings is a concern for you in the N55, and if so, what steps are you going to take towards it? Not same thing. Typically not until much higher mileage, or unless you track the car heavily. In that case, you can go aftermarket. I haven't done much research to recommend one brand or the other, but I would say if you're not pushing over 100,000 miles and if you're not tracking your car, there's no concern with the rod bearings until you cross either of those thresholds. Mark, what up? How's it going? Is it normal for the oil temp to go close to the 250 Fahrenheit mark, but not touch it? Oil temp. Let's see here. Only because my thing is in Celsius. So this is the hottest that my car typically runs. I think I've had it go before I did like all the cooling mods, like the max tuning on BM3, which activates the cooling components sooner and runs them slightly more aggressively. Before doing the Mosselman oil thermostat, before doing all of those things, I was probably running closer to 105 degrees Celsius, at least on water temp. And water temp is only a few degrees off from oil. And so I was close to 220, I guess. And then now I'm much closer to 212. I've never run that high to come up at 250. Yeah, I've never seen that. I would say it's not normal, at least in my experience. Even if you're talking like 248, 240, that's still really high. I mean, it's rare for me to see 105 nowadays. Yeah. You can try changing coolant, changing oil. If you spot a leak, go from there. Yeah. Oil, coolant, check your lines, and then go from there. If you're running a tune like BM3, activate the max cooling mode and see if that helps you. Jonathan, I think the cooling plastics failing prematurely may be a result of a cheaper manufacturing process, possibly. If I'm not mistaken, BMW is manufacturing all these plastic components in-house. And so they're the ones who are sourcing the plastics, if I'm not mistaken. Don't know, but it amazes me how some parts just can't have a simple clamp like Toyota. Yeah. It's mostly because BMW wants to own the marketplace. Very similar to how iPhones took a very long time to adopt USB-C. It's because iPhone or Apple had all the patent rights to that Thunderbolt port, and they didn't want to let it go because it didn't matter if it was some knockoff $2 brand. If, brand ABC123 sold a lightning cable that was adaptable to iPhone, Apple got a cut of that, no matter how you slice it. But because USB-C is not exclusive to Apple, they don't get a cut. So like if the Anchor brand sells a USB-C cable that you put into your iPhone, Apple didn't make money on it. That's why they didn't want to make USB-C iPhones until just recently. They were fighting so hard to not do it because every lightning cable got, Apple got a cut. And that's essentially what BMW wants to do with their lines. They don't want you to adapt a universal hose on there, like a silicone one that you can cut in its place. They want you to buy the OEM branded pieces. And that's why I believe they don't allow us to have a simple universal clamp that you can buy from Amazon, AutoZone, or wherever it is that you are at the moment that you need it. You have to go to the dealership. You have to order it online, or if you buy the OE version versus the OEM one, same thing. In a roundabout way, BMW makes the money because they're sourcing the original part. They're just not stamping it. Or they, gave the mold or the design to another company to make the plastic, and BMW gets a cut of it because it's their design. That's what I believe. Rand, at what point does it make sense to invest in a rear wing for downforce? Track. Honestly, just track, or if you're drag racing the car, or if you've done everything else, for the most part, a wing is basically going to be aesthetics. Now, if you're okay with just doing aesthetics, right, and then by all means, you could do it at any point. Just know that, like a street car, no matter how hard you drive it, again, extreme canyon carving, you're not going to see that much more of a benefit from it. It's not until you get on the track where it really makes sense. And I'm not talking about like a weekend track where I'm talking like you're tracking competitively, you're doing time attacks, you're, medium to expert level track user. Mr. Draws, I took my 2012 335i into the shop after buying it a few weeks ago and found out I have a cracked headlamp housing and need $3,000 parts to repair and repairs to fix it. I'd like to do it myself, but I am doubtful. 2012, you could give it a shot. Headlamp is pretty easy if you source the parts yourself. I think 2012 is like the cutoff. If we're talking like F30, then just follow the instructions here. And if there's anything else that you need, YouTube it. Some of the stuff like that's easy, just try to do it yourself. And then whatever you don't have the tools for, whatever you feel that is really beyond your capabilities, then take it to a shop. That way you minimize the financial burden on yourself. Did Mickey Mouse flange preventatively, and it came out pretty. Wow, you're lucky. I took out 2 and both like cracked after basically the part that went into the block, that part came out. So basically I wouldn't be able to put it back in even if I wanted to. You're lucky though. But if it comes out, if that part is a little bit brown, give it a little bit of a scrape with like a screwdriver or something, and then go on like the outside where the plastic is really good, and you'll notice a difference. You should notice a difference if there's been enough wear on it. So like if it just started to turn brown, you might not notice that big of a difference. But if it's pretty much like a very clear brown that you can't get rid of, then yeah, scrape it a little bit and you'll know what I'm talking about. It feels much softer. Let's see here. Good thing I have a new radiator hose in a box ready to be installed. Yeah. I feel like that's one thing that a lot of us N55 owners always have on hand. At least, dealerships do. Shops always have it just because it's so prone to breaking. Mark, how much horsepower have you heard of an N20 ever make? I don't know. Let's see here. 240 horsepower. Let's see here. How much horsepower? 241 is what BeamerTech is saying was the fastest N20. And 13, something going to ask. Let's see here. Yeah, it's not. I think I know somebody who's trying to go 400 with it. I think 400 was the number. Okay, so someone wants to go 350. So yeah, it seems like 400 is probably the highest that you could go. But again, you're probably talking about like upgraded turbos, full bolt-on, all of the things. You have to have supporting cooling mods, and then you're good to go. So I'm going to assume 400, but if anybody else here knows, please include it in the chat. Jonathan, knowing that since the upper radiator hose is pretty hot, are there any other cooling hoses that are prone to failing besides that return line to the overflow tank? Cooling hoses. I mean, rubber hoses over time will go bad. So like the oil cooler lines, like those could go bad over time just because, heat cycling the rubber, eventually it's going to go bad. You don't necessarily need to do the hoses that are attached to the water pump. But my theory is, if it's already out, you've already drained the coolant, and you can get your hands on a silicone one, just replace it. Just replace it because you're already there. It's already drained. Silicone is going to last a little bit longer than rubber. It's more heat resistant, and it's one less likely of a fail point, right? So you can replace your thermostat, your water pump, and if a small crack or if the rubber isn't ready to degrade just yet, but it does not too long, maybe like a year or two after you did the thermostat and the water pump, it starts to degrade. Then you're gonna be like, oh my goodness, I should have just replaced the pump when I had the chance. Now I got to drain the oil again. I got to, take the time to do all of that, then dispose of the coolant, actually replace the lines. If you're already there, just do it. Is when it comes to things like that are carrying fluids, just do it. Alex, does getting a catless downpipe increase intake temps? No. Intake temps are completely independent of your downpipe, because they happen at very different places. Intake temp is mostly dependent on if you have an open or closed intake system, the ambient air temperature at the time, and then everything after the turbo is really dependent on how efficient or how big your intercooler is, all of which have nothing really to do with the downpipe increasing temperatures. Now, if you have an upgraded intercooler, if you have intake that seals off from the engine bay and you're only pulling from the outside, that could reduce the temperatures that you feel at the downpipe, but it's kind of irrelevant. So it's really a reverse, if anything. Now, if you tune the car after you've done a downpipe, that could increase your intake temps, but it's very minimal. It's not because you did a downpipe that your intake temps increased. Mr. Draws, many manufacturers do similar things with proprietary parts and screw/bolt sizes and specialty tools or special tools. Yeah, I would agree. And it all comes back to money. It's all money for them at the end of the day. Fritz, is the headlight housing not the headlamp itself? Yes, F30. Yes, the headlamp housing is the headlamp itself. The bulbs, depending on which kit you get, may or may not come with it. Some of the LED halogen, the LED halogen replacements it's all integrated, so there's not a separate bulb inside. Some of them, like a projector style, may include a halogen bulb that you can replace with an HID or an LED. Just make sure that you know what you're getting before you get it, because if you need to, then you do need to source the extra bulb. If you get one that's all integrated with its own LED pack, those tend to be a little bit more expensive. So whatever you're willing to spend, if it's like in the $500 or $600, you might be able to get one with a replaceable bulb. If you're paying like $1,000 or something like that, then you're probably getting one where it's it's one entire unit that looks like it's separate, but realistically, the LED bulb or bulbs, whatever it is, it's all integrated into the headlamp itself. Do you know of any upgrades for the F3328i headlamps? I have the halogen ones and they suck. It's hard to see at night. Yes, so I can get back to that. Here you go. Hope that helps. Those are actually the ones that are on this car. Because if I'm not mistaken, they are kind of phasing out the headlight style that was on the white car in favor of the full LEDs that are currently on the red one. So hopefully that helps you. If not, you know, just send a comment, or you can send me a DM on Instagram at VroomTuber. And hopefully the installation goes well. I'm sure that you can. That one's very easy. You do have to remove the bumper, but it sounds worse than it is. Just take your time. Make sure that you undo all the things like the headlight washer fluid, the sensors, the fog lights if you have them, and you'll be fine. It's not a bad in terms of a DIY to begin your DIY career path on when it comes to working on your car. So I hope that that's helpful. Again, if you need anything, just reach out to me at Instagram or comment on the video itself, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm sorry, I'm very behind with the comments and the DMs lately. I'm still in the process of moving. I probably won't be done for like another month or two, because it's not just me moving my stuff to the new place. I'm actually helping some of my other family members move into their other place as well as doing some home renovations for them as well. So I recently just built out like 3 closets, which don't ask me to do this because it's really not my forte. I told them, you know, we're family. I'm not going to charge you, but I hope you understand that you're going to get what you paid for. I'm going to do my best, but you're definitely getting what you paid for here. So I have a few more home projects and final movings in that I need to address. And hopefully once that's all addressed, I'm not too far behind in the comments. I'll do my best. But I do apologize if I've fallen behind a little bit on all of that. Alex, what stage would you recommend upgrading ignition coils for the N55? If so, what are my options? You could do them with your spark plugs, which is about every 60, depending on how hard you run your plugs or your car itself, you could replace them every 40 to 60,000 miles. Just go OEM. If you don't care about looks, if you're okay with like the standard black switch that's on them, go OEM. Unless you're doing some heavy modifications, I'm talking you need a custom fuel rail, you need upgraded fuel injectors. There's no benefit to getting aftermarket, okay? Like, they're not really aftermarket. All that they did was buy OEM injectors and they put a red or a blue tab on them to label them as their own. There's no benefit, no performance benefit of getting aftermarket or performance ignition coils, because you're still running basically the same plugs, right? Your fuel system hasn't changed. You haven't upgraded your high pressure fuel pump. You haven't upgraded your low pressure fuel pump. You haven't upgraded your turbo. Just stick with the OEM, get them from FCP Hero, get the OE or the OEM one, whichever one's cheaper at the time. It's going to be the same thing. Just do it when you do your plugs, because you got to pull them out anyways. Or if you have to do a valve cover gasket job, you do your valve cover gasket with the plugs and the coils. You take a little bit more time because you don't necessarily have to take out the plugs when you do the valve cover gasket, but you do have to take out the plugs And by doing so, you expose the spark plugs. And so I would just say go ahead and do it at that time. So thank you everybody for tuning in for the live. I hope this was helpful for all of you. If you have any other questions, if you need anything, just go ahead, send me a DM, comment on the video that you need help with. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And I look forward to seeing all of you next Tuesday.